Welcome to our grant presentation. What I'm going to do is provide you with some tips for writing your grant application, which will hopefully improve your chances of being awarded a grant. But first, a little bit of context about Green Adelaide. The state is divided up into 9 landscape regions. 8 of them are regional, with the metropolitan one being called Green Adelaide. As you can see on the screen, we have a vision to create a cooler, greener, wilder and climate resilient Adelaide. The map shows that our region goes from the Gawler River in the north down to Sellex in the south and along the Hills Face zone. Now, the reason for mentioning this is that's the very first requirement with the grant, in that your project needs to occur within the Green Adelaide region. You don't have to live in Green Adelaide, your organisation doesn't have to be based in Green Adelaide, but your project must occur within the Green Adelaide region. If it turns out your project site is right on the boundary of our region, there is a little bit of scope for you to encroach into the adjacent landscape board region. If that's the case, get in touch with us and we can advise you further. To help you confirm that your project site is within the Green Adelaide region, on the grants page of our website, we have an interactive map that you can use. So as you can see on the screen, it's the past successful grants recipients page. If you scroll down, you can see the map here. You can zoom in on the map and see the boundary and determine obviously if your site is within or out of the Green Adelaide region. In addition to the zooming, you can click the search function and type in an address for your project site. So that's obviously something quite useful as well. The other interesting thing about this map, the pins or the dots on the map, you can click those and that'll give you some information about all the previously funded Grassroots Grants projects. So if you're looking for ideas to inspire you for your project, or looking to see if other projects that have similar aims have been funded in the past, certainly use that function. In this year's grant program, a total of $1.2 million is available. Now, each individual applicant, you are required to apply for at least $2,000 up to a maximum of $200,000. And as you can see on the screen, anything over $50,000 requires some additional supporting documentation, and some of the questions, a bit more information is required. For grants below $10,000, the expectation is that they will be completed within 12 months and you'll be receiving 100% of your funds upfront. For grants over $10,000, there's the option to do them over multiple years, up to 3 years in total, and you will receive partial payment. So you'll receive an initial payment, and then after a set amount of time, for example 6 months, you'll be asked for a progress report, whereby if you're on track, then you'll receive the future payments. So who can apply? Well, again, as you can see on the screen, you must be a legal entity. Now, this includes individuals or partners, incorporated community groups, NGOs, associations, schools, unis, etc. If you aren't a legal entity, you can still apply. However, you just need a legal entity to become your sponsor. These sponsors become legally responsible for receiving and managing the grant funding that you receive, as well as being responsible for the reporting through the life of your grant project. As you can see on the screen, there are a number of different sponsoring organisation examples that we've provided. So for example, if you're a Catholic school, you'll need to use the Catholic Church Endowment Society to be your sponsor. Local government can be a sponsor too, and it doesn't have to be a local government from within Green Adelaide. We've had examples of local councils outside the region becoming sponsors for projects that are occurring within Green Adelaide. If you're a community group that's not incorporated, you can have a sponsor that is an incorporated community group, and friends of parks as well. So individual friends of groups aren't legal entities in their own right. However, Friends of Parks SA is, so you can use them as your sponsor. As you can see, sponsors may claim up to a 10% administration fee, and there's also a template available on our website and also within Smarty Grants that you can use to write to sponsors and get them to become a sponsor for your project. A small change this year is that we are asking you to complete a vendor creation form up front and include it in your application. So essentially what it is asking for your bank account details and your contact details. That way we'll have all of your information in the system, so if you are successful in receiving a grant, we can effectively and quickly get the money out to you once we've made the decision on who gets the grants. To apply for your grant, you'll need to use Smarty Grants, which is an online grants management system. A lot of you will have used it before, but if you haven't, you'll need to register by providing an email address and creating a password. So that's covered most of the administrative parts of the grant application. Now we're on to the main key points. As you can see on the screen, there are 8 different dot points. For the rest of the presentation, I'm actually going to go through those one at a time, explain exactly what it is that we are after and why we're after that information, and hopefully provide some tips and tricks to help you answer these questions. In this project details section, there are a few parts that you have to answer. Project title, obviously, is pretty self-explanatory. The short project summary is limited to 150 words. Now, my suggestion is to be very succinct and very direct in explaining what your project is. That way, the assessment panel, when they're reading this summary, they'll have a really clear understanding of what it is that you're hoping to achieve. The project end date will, of course, be determined by the duration of your project. We are hoping to get the grant agreement sent out to the successful applicants late August, early September, so use that as your starting date. The reference there to connected with the Green Adelaide staff member, what that is we strongly recommend that you get in touch with us and speak to a staff member who can assist you with any project planning or advice about your application. Now, one of the most important parts of your application are the Green Adelaide priorities and focus areas. Green Adelaide has a number of priorities that are legislated in our regional landscape plan, and for the Grassroots Grant program, we're looking at 4 of those priorities. Your task is to select one of these priorities that your project is going to contribute to. Your application will be assessed on how well it aligns with that priority that you have selected. Now, your project may contribute to more than one priority, which is fine. However, you will have to pick which of those it most closely aligns to. Now that you've selected your priority, the next question relates to the project activities. That is, what activities are you going to undertake to address the priority that you have selected? As you can see on the screen, there are 11 different activities for you to choose from. You, of course, have to pick at least one. However, feel free to pick as many as are relevant for your project. Further information about the activities are available in the grant guidelines. This is what the project activities question looks like in Smarty Grants. The box here that says Browse, if you click that, you'll see all of the different activities listed. I'll pick, for example, revegetation, and you'll see that it says only one choice can be selected. That's one choice per line. So if I was undertaking additional activities, I'd either click this blue plus symbol here, or I can click Add More, and you'll see a second box appears where I can select a second activity, and so on. Now that you've locked in your activities, the next question are the outputs. What they are is thinking about your activities. What is it that you are hoping to achieve with those activities? Like before, there's a table. If you click Browse, you'll see all of the possible 11 activities. The ones that you've highlighted will be in a darker text color. Obviously, I picked habitat creation and re-veg, so I select the first one, and you'll see it's asking me about number of structures installed. There are 3 subsequent questions. So the target, so for example, I might be doing nest boxes in my habitat structures, so I might put 4 nest boxes. Description, what is it that I'm putting up, what type of nest boxes, and timing, when am I going to be installing those. For all of your activities, you need to answer these output questions. So for example, like before, you can pick the blue plus symbol or click add more, and it will add another row. So then I go to my other one, and revegetation actually has 2 outputs that I have to report of. Total area revegetated and number of plants planted. Again, I'll need to report on how many plants, what type of plants, timing, etc. So as I mentioned before, you'll need to do that for every activity that you have selected in your previous question. Partners are another question that we'll be asking you about. So think about any individuals, groups that are supporting you with your project. You need to write the name of them and obviously how they are contributing to your project. Please note that if you are paying a contractor to do work for you, they don't qualify as a partner. The next important question is the budget. Now, in Smarty Grants, you'll see there's a budget table that has 5 separate columns. The first is asking for a description of what that item is. Second one is how much are you asking from Green Adelaide. The third is what cash or cash equivalent are you able to contribute. A description of that, and then in the notes column you can explain a bit more detail about the particular budget item. So for example, for my revegetation project, I might say tube stock. I might be asking for $400. I can't actually contribute anything myself. And in the notes, I might say 100 plants at $4 each. I can add more columns for the next item. Now, the next item I might be saying mulch. Now, I'm not asking anything from Green Adelaide, but I did receive a donation of the equivalent of $1,000 of mulch from, let's say, the city of Mitcham, and I can then in the notes explain exactly what it is. You'll notice that the grant table automatically adds up all those amounts. So I'm asking for 400, I'm contributing the equivalent of 1,000, and my total project budget is $1,400. There are obviously ways you can upload supporting evidence, be it quotes, invoices, whatever it is, to justify how much you are asking. Not everyone is able to contribute financially to your project, but a way that we can capture your input is via the volunteer hours, or sometimes called your in-kind contribution. So basically we're valuing the time that you are volunteering towards your project. So there are 2 fields to enter. One is the number of volunteers working on your project and the number of volunteer hours. So for example, if I have 10 volunteers, they work for an hour, obviously my total volunteer hours is 10, and you can see it is automatically calculated using this value of $46.62 per hour. So I'm contributing $466.20 in volunteer hours. That value gets added to my overall project to look at, say, value for money, for example. If I'm asking for $400, I'm contributing $1,000 in the mulch, and I'm also contributing $466.20 in volunteer hours. The next question relates to risk management. Now, as outlined earlier, for projects over $50,000, a risk management plan will need to be uploaded. But for smaller projects, there are just a couple of fields to enter information. So really what we're looking at here are what are the risks that you perceive that may stop your project succeeding, or what are some risks, for example, volunteers might injure themselves during an activity. So what we need you to do is identify the risk and what management plan are you going to put in place to address that risk. For example, looking at the project side of things, you might have, if you're a school, say for example a key teacher leaves, your management of that is a number of staff will be responsible for delivering the project. If, for example, you tried to run a workshop but not many people turned up, your management of that risk is maybe we'll look at how we advertise, improve that, and rerun the workshop at another time. As far as the injury side of things, again, going back to my revegetation planting example, standard risks of providing PPE so that people don't injure themselves, all sorts of things that you can consider. Providing supporting evidence is a key part of your project application. Now on the screen you can see some examples of the different kinds of documents that we may require. Clearly for your budget, any quotes that you receive, we've talked about that previously. Talked about partners, so if you have partners or sponsors, you obviously need letters from them. A really useful thing for the assessment panel are maps and site photos. It doesn't have to be a formal map, even just a quick mud map that you've drawn on a sheet of paper will be really, really useful. Obviously, any approvals or permits, if you're working on, say for example, council land, you'll need approvals from them, water affecting activity permits, those sorts of things. Plant lists are really useful as well. So any lists of local native plants that you may be using or other plants, we'd like to know that. And as I just touched on, the risk assessments for those projects that are over $50,000 are essential. The grant guidelines list all the eligible activities that you can potentially apply for. Here though is just a quick snapshot of some of them. Now the sponsor one we've already talked about, that they can claim up to a 10% admin fee. Project manager costs can be included. Now this is particularly important for some of those larger grants, so getting up to the $200,000 mark. If you have a huge big project, having someone managing that obviously would be beneficial. Private landholders are required to chip in 50-50. So you ask for half the amount with Green Adelaide and you match it with your own contribution. That can be either paid or in-kind contribution. As we touched on earlier, multiple applications are able to be submitted, but obviously it's merit-based. The applicant must have insurance upon signing the grant agreement. If you are a volunteer group that needs insurance, get in touch with Green Adelaide as we'll be able to potentially help you out. And training costs must be co-funded by the applicant. Again, like with the landholders, it's a 50-50 split. So if you are applying for any form of training or workshops, whatever it may be, you can ask for 50% and contribute the other 50% yourself. Continuing with the eligible activities, the first one here is that funding for advanced trees will be considered in high use areas or for instant cooling benefits. Now this is a little different to past years where we really focused on tube stock. So as you can see, under those situations, there is some scope for advanced trees. If you have any questions about that, obviously get in touch with us. Again, another slight change is that for greening purposes, non-native species will be considered. Obviously, we still highly recommend local native plants, but if you can't do that, certainly non-natives are acceptable. With the research projects, as it says here, they must demonstrate how the project will benefit the local community. So that's another really important thing to consider if you are a research project. And the other change, irrigation and infrastructure costs will be considered if it relates directly to new plantings. So essentially what that means is if you had an existing garden and you applied for irrigation and that's all you're asking for, that wouldn't be eligible. Whereas if you're doing a new garden and looking at installing irrigation as part of that, then certainly that will be eligible item. Again, like with all of these, if you have any questions, get in touch with us and we'll be able to provide you some information about that. Looking at the ineligible activities, there are a number listed on the screen. So things like purchasing assets that could be considered for personal use, components that have no environmental benefit, just straight infrastructure like pergolas, sheds, etc. A new one this year is that we're not funding vegetable gardens. We can fund fruit trees as a part of cooling, and any local native plants, for example Aboriginal use plants, they're certainly eligible for funding, but straight up vegetable gardens are not. Nature play equipment isn't included, and activities that generate profit also, and obviously boundary fencing, so relating to properties, land managers, boundary fencing isn't eligible either. The assessment of the grant applications is a multi-stage process. So once all the applications have been deemed eligible, the first stage is a technical assessment. Then the individual assessment panel members go through and rank your applications based on merit. Then they get together and compare their rankings and come up with an overall ranking. Then the Green Adelaide board approves that process. So as I said before, it's certainly merit-based. Some of the items on the screen here are what the assessment panel are basing their assessment upon. If you are successful in receiving a grant, this is a quick summary of the process. So you'll receive a grant agreement that you'll need to sign and obviously return to Green Adelaide. You'll need to send an invoice to receive the money, and because we talked about that vendor form earlier, this process will be a lot simpler. You'll be allocated a Green Adelaide contact officer to work with you through the duration of your project. You'll be required to keep records, so obviously any receipts, etc. But also photos are especially important, because when it comes to the end of your project, you'll need to report on what you have achieved. So having photos to support that will be really valuable. There are also variation forms. So if anything happens during the duration of your project that you need to change something, some aspect of your project, you can certainly contact Green Adelaide, and there are the variation forms that you can fill out. Reporting I touched on earlier. At the end of the project, you'll need to obviously acquit your budget, but also ask a series of really simple questions about the outcomes of your project. And of course, all along the way, promotion is a really important thing. We'd like to showcase all the amazing projects that we fund. So yes, we'd really like to work with you on different ways that we can promote your project. So hopefully all that provided a bit of context around what it is that we're after and how you might answer some of those questions. Here's just a few simple tips on where to go now. So I've mentioned a few times, certainly read the grant guidelines thoroughly. Have a look at that interactive map on the website around what past projects have been funded. There are also some grant stories on the website that go into quite a bit more detail as well. Clearly outline what it is that you want to do, step out your project bit by bit, think around what resources are you going to need. It could be people resources, it could be financial resources. The timing of your grant is really important as well. So especially for those multi-year projects, exactly what it is you're going to do, when you're going to do it. We talked about partners, thinking about who you can involve, and again, talking about any technical advice you can get from Green Adelaide staff members, so certainly use that. Here are just some of the key dates. So 15th of May at 5 p.m. is when applications close. Unfortunately, there's no possibility of extensions, so certainly keep that due date in mind. The assessment period will happen from May to June. And as I touched on earlier, successful applicants, we're hoping to be able to announce them late August or early September. This table here shows the list of Green Adelaide staff members that can be contacted for technical advice in helping you to prepare your grant application. Now, this table was taken from the grant guidelines, so certainly check the guidelines to find the information about who you contact and how you contact them. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your grant applications.